In our day-to-day lives, we have the opportunity to meet new people often. However, some people don't always have our best interest in mind, if they are even human at all. In today's video, I will be telling 4 stories. A huge thank you to the writers. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, a like and a comment is always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. My neighbor has had pretty serious mental problems for the whole time I've known him since he moved in about a decade ago. I was too young to really understand what was going on at the start, why he would pull up to his own house with the bumper caved in and stumbling out of the car, why my mother would hide us away from the windows when he would begin storming around in the street, face red and eyes wide shouting nonsense. Being a single mother and only child, we became an easy target for his rampages, and he would often hammer on our door to try and instigate a conflict. I was a dumb kid and trying to protect our small house from a guy I thought was just being a jerk. I once answered the door to his rage. I'll never forget how he was stood there, drenched in sweat and his eyes rolling in their sockets. His skin was red and straining as his jaw swung back and forward, gnashing his teeth. "Leave us alone, James. We don't have anything to say to you." But despite my bold words, my 14-year-old voice cracked under his crazed gaze that made me think of racehorses. He might as well have stomped his feet into the ground. It was the first, thought it wouldn't be the last, time I looked into a man's eyes and seen that he wanted to kill me. Snarling like a dog, he had thrown his hands towards my face, and though I tried to dash backwards as he grabbed at my hair, tearing so hard he was grasping a clump of my blonde locks in his closed fist not a moment later. I screamed and raised my elbows above my head, anticipating another blow. It never came though. Instead, there was a dull thump as James collapsed onto the ground convulsing. It was almost a decade ago, but the sight of his sweat-soaked body, writhing uncontrollably on the floor with his eyes in the back of his head, and his own spittle flicking down his chin as he jerked, was burned into my mind. Of what followed, I don't remember much, apart from his wife finally grasping the courage to rush out of her own home, mobile in hand, frantically weeping to the ambulance services. Honestly, it may sound cruel, but it wasn't the seizure he suffered that scarred me, it was his rage. Following the incident, and for many years to come, I had horrifically vivid nightmares of James being stood in the shadowy corner of my room, snarling and leering with my hair clutched in his fist, as his eyes bored into my subconscious. The nightmares pushed me to seek professional help. They suggested with pompous authority it may be due to my home environment. Being the only young daughter of a single mother, I was underexposed to a dominant male presence, especially a volatile one. That would be why it had shaken me so. I suggested that that was bullcrap, and just some gendered psychology jargon. I'd encountered men before, for Christ's sakes. I didn't bother with therapy much after that. I knew what it was. It was the way his eyes burned, pupils blown to the size of planets. With such inhuman hatred, it was like having a genuine demonic entity at the door. The way his jaw swung and flecks of blood from where he had bitten through his own lips, and cheeks were like something out of an exorcism film. I knew it was the effects of an overdose, and I would encounter many characters with similar facial features at 5 a.m. in sweaty clubs in London later on in life. Too many. But that day stuck with me, and I no longer answered the doors when he would later go on his rampages and begin shrieking in the streets. I feel I should explain that I live in a very middle-class area of rural England, where the general attitude to personal failings is to ignore it and pretend it wasn't happening. A prime example being James, who would relapse, begin his ritual raging. Either the ambulance or police would come and calm him down. We, the community, watch from behind our curtains and gossip in hushed tones about, oh, what a shame it was. What a waste of a young life. As I got older, James got fatter and more dull-eyed. I'd sometimes see him wandering about the village, seemingly lost and almost infantile. The medication they were giving him must have started working. Soon enough, though, I moved away for university, and the rages of my broken neighbor were no longer an issue I had to contend with. The 3 years passed hard and fast with a lot of study, but also a lot else. I became harder, less trusting, and more wise of the realities of the world we lived in. One morning I woke up covered in blood that wasn't mine. Another, with a tongue so swollen, from where I had chewed through it, I could barely breathe. It became life for a while. When I would visit home, James would sometimes be sat in his garden, which I could see from my old bedroom window. He would be staring into nothing whilst absently petting his pet kitten, which apparently he had decided to get on a whim. I didn't fear the man anymore. I pitied him, and I understood him. We were all running from something, and would do anything to allow us to forget. At least that's what I thought. About a year after graduating due to some unforeseen circumstances, I had to move back in with my mom. Long story short, but my boyfriend of 4 years had found someone younger and less complicated, and had promptly kicked me out of our shared flat. I don't want to go into it, to be honest, but let's say it certainly didn't make things any less complicated with me for a long while. I wasn't fond of the village I'd grown up in, especially after living in my dream home of London for so long. I spent a lot of time alone in the house, as my mom worked abroad almost constantly, and it was a big house to just have one person in it. As a kid, it used to scare me, but as the battle-scarred veteran I felt like now, I was fine. I would usually just come home after work, drink myself into a stupor, and pass out. Rinse and repeat. Pathetic, I know. But I was going through some stuff, alright? It was about a month after moving back into Ma's place that I saw James for the first time again. I was driving home, bottles clanking in the back seats, and half my attention on the rearview mirror, staring into my own blotchy face. God, I look like crap. Why don't I just... James was stood in the middle of the road, slack-jawed and staring straight at me. I slammed on the brakes and my tires skidded, coming to a stop less than a foot from where his protruding belly hung below his stained shirt. As I steadied my breathing with one hand on my chest, I held his empty gaze. Something clenched uncomfortably in my gut. His posture was completely limp, with his hands almost swinging by his sides, and his neck barely supporting his head. It was like some invisible force was holding him by the scruff of his neck. A human ragdoll. I'd almost hit him at 50 miles per hour, and he hadn't even flinched. Unsteadily I opened my car door, not taking my eyes off of James. His eyes didn't follow my movements, but instead continued to stare emptily at the driver's seat. "James?" I called out. My voice didn't quiver like it had as a child, but I still didn't sound brave. He didn't respond. I checked about quickly for any other cars, but with this being rural England, there wasn't a sodding soul. It was only then that I noticed the air had a strange smell to it, like how it smells when lightning is about to strike. But it was a bright spring day, and the sky was completely devoid of cloud. "James, you alright, mate?" I approached slowly with my arm extended. I couldn't get the idea of something holding him up out of my head, and I felt I could almost see the strings pulling on his shoulder blades. His whole face was bloated and lumpy from the years of alcoholism, the slackness of it all casting deep hollow shadows under his eyes, which had shrunk to pinpricks. I stopped in my tracks, about a meter distance from him. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way the smell of electricity was making my hair stand on end, and the twisting of my gut was pulling me back into my car. As I withdrew my arm, James seemed to almost vibrate. Tiny movements shivered through his lifeless body, and the smell became stronger than ever. Screw this. I stumbled backwards with my hands blindly reaching for my car door. My fingers painfully crashed against the car frame, and I tried to swing myself into the driver's seat, knocked my head slightly as I went. Falling in behind the wheel, the air seemed to explode with a crack, and I screeched, curling myself into a ball, convinced lightning had struck the car. I couldn't have looked away for more than a second. James was stood on the other side of the road, opposite my car, and facing into the darkening fields, approximately 15 feet from where he had been stood less than a minute ago. I turned on the ignition, slammed my foot on the acceleration, and my tires screeched as me and my car fled the scene. When I arrived home less than a couple of minutes later, it must have taken me less than 10 seconds to leap from my car, bottles and keys in hand, and slam my front door shut behind me. The sun began to set rapidly as I double-locked all the entrances. checked all the windows, and drew the curtains before pouring myself a large drink and stationing myself in my mother's room, where I could peek down into the street below, almost invisible. I knew what I had seen. I'd either lost time when that crack had split the air, or James wasn't himself. Whatever that even was, I needed to keep my guard. That night I fell asleep with my bottle in my lap and didn't see James again. In fact, I didn't see him for another 2 weeks. This time I had been home for almost an hour, so I had already had a few drinks, but nothing that could distract from the sudden familiar feeling of static and the smell of electricity that infested the air. I rushed to my mother's empty bedroom, and with curtains drawn, peered down into the street below. My movement was a little sloppy, and my mind was already a little distractible. Looking down into the inky streets, of which I had grown up on, I couldn't help the bittersweet childhood memories come back. I felt my brows knit together on my forehead, in a furrow as my fingers clenched around my glass. I was so innocent back then, and so naive. I took another long drink, and reached again for the bottle. That's when another loud crack caused me to start in my seat, and curse as I spilt half of it down myself. Peeking through the blinds, I saw his wonky figure dimly silhouetted in the dying light. He seemed to stand motionless for a moment, before almost tumbling forward in staggering lopsided steps. He was only just managing to stay upright, as if trying to master his limbs like a paraplegic in rehabilitation. This wasn't the drunken stagger I was familiar observing, but rather something truly and disturbingly unnatural. Through my tipsy state, a sharp needle of true fear slid down my spine, as he drew closer in his awful, exaggerated, disjointed stride. It was as if something was trying to mimic a man's stride. From the distance I could see that his gaping mouth was opening, and closing as his neck bucked as if he was choking on something. His head rolled on his neck, throwing him off balance slightly, and he stumbled into a lamppost which illuminated his features in a lurid display. My alcohol-soaked stomach flipped as I saw his mouth and teeth were soaked in his own blood, from where he was gnashing, trying to spit out his own words past a bloated tongue. His eyes were rolled into the back of his head, exposing the ghoulish bloodshot whites. His skin looked so pale and gray under the lights for a moment. I imagined it running like wax off of his skull. It was as I was staring in horror at the mockery of the human state, that his eyes sunk back down from his head and met mine directly. My breath caught in my throat, and as I held his gaze I found myself unable to breathe. His chapped white lips were trying to curl upwards, and what I could only guess was a hellish attempt at a smile. He has too many teeth. How does he have that many square teeth? Those thoughts floated across my mind, but they barely registered. Unable to move, I found myself only able to stare with my own eyes pinned open as his arm jerked upwards towards me, extending his fingers almost in a beckoning fashion. It was in this moment that I saw his hand had no thumb, no scar, no blood, just smooth white skin. It was as if his body had glitched and forgotten to include them. My stomach heaved and it broke the trance. I scrambled desperately to my feet and fled to the bathroom to throw up my guts. While sobbing and sweating on the bathroom floor, I called the police, begging them to come as fast as they could. My neighbor was threatening me while intoxicated, and I was home alone. In the 15 minutes it took the officers to get to my house, I remained in the bathroom, mobile phone clutched to my chest, and armed with nothing but the bottle I was trying to drink as quickly as possible, in case I needed to smash it to use it as an improvised weapon. As I cowered on the floor between the sink and tub, I thought I could hear a faint chattering, gibbering sound circling the house, drifting in from the left, coming closer before disappearing to the right, again before returning. Hot tears spilled down my face, and by the time the police arrived I was in full-blown hysterics. They told me with steely voices that they found no one, and no evidence of anyone around the building, and that they had spoken to my neighbor, and he had been preparing and eating dinner with his wife for the past hour. I tried to explain what I saw, with slurring words, but I was promptly cut off sternly by the female officer. After a quick talk about public intoxication and false police calls, they drove off with their sirens silent, and I was left alone in a place, and in a body I wasn't sure I felt safe in anymore. I decided to lay down and try to get some sleep. Desperate for the embrace to block out the occasional chatter I thought I heard from my window. That was just over a week ago. I keep seeing him everywhere now. At work we've been receiving these calls where it's just static, and that gibbering sound. Out in public I swear I keep smelling that awful stench of ozone, which has me fleeing from the area. Worst of all is when I'm driving home. I keep thinking I see him stood on the side of the road, only for him to vanish again when I look. My drinking has become out of control, and I've started taking a hip flask to work, just to keep down the panic attacks. I feel strung out. The circles under my eyes look like bruises, and I haven't been able to eat anything in days. My desk keeps getting covered in blonde hairs from where I've nervously tugged my notes. My colleagues have asked me tentatively if everything is alright, but I just give them the shaky response that everything is fine. It's fine. Everything is fine. I have this dim sense of unraveling. It's the only way I can describe it. I don't know if it's James, or this village, or me, or something else entirely. Whatever it is, it's accelerating, and starting to open at the seams. Tonight I am sat on my own windowsill, chain smoking a pack of Reds, and gulping down hard vodka as much as I can bear. From where I am sat, I can see him clear as day. He is stood in my mother's back garden, clearly illuminated by the automatic lights we have out there. James is stood at all odd angles, with his joints hanging the wrong way, and his body vibrating minutely. He is leering with a bloody smile that is far too large for his face. The harshness of the light only makes his gory, gnashing teeth stand out all the more against his grey face. His eyes are the worst, though. They're almost cartoonish in their abnormal size, set deep into his face but wide enough and rolling to show the thousands of burst vessels, at the same time as the absolute onyx of the blown pupil, which has completely swallowed the iris. They stare up at me, and I stare back with ice coursing through my veins, and my body shaking uncontrollably with adrenaline and pure fear. I can see all this, and yet I must continue to look, and keep him in my sight. If I keep my eyes on him, at least I know where he is. Tears stream constantly down my face, but my sobs are silent. The only noise is the small tinkling noises of my glass rattling against my rings as I tremble. That and the small chattering noise that comes from down below. That is the reason that I have to stay up here on guard. Because though this awful thing in the shape of James has me terrified for my life, I am more afraid of what stands behind him. Caught half in the shadow caused by James' shuddering body, there is another figure. It stands awkwardly and crooked like him, as if its limbs have been broken and healed wrong. It vibrates against the air like him, and its neck twitches every half a minute or so to emit a small, high unnatural chittering. I can't see any features, as it's facing away from my vantage point, but I can imagine they are also blown out of proportion and hellish. I drain my glass, and without looking away from the creatures in the garden below, I swiftly pour myself another blind, but spilling nothing. I light another cigarette, and feel the smoke hard in my lungs, and the hard liquor tingle down my throat, lining my insides like lead. I may not be able to see the face of the other figure, but its platinum blonde hair certainly looks a lot like mine. I'm writing this because I don't know where else I can put it. I can never tell someone or post it online under my real name. I just really don't know what to do. This happened a couple nights ago, on Saturday. I'm a vlogger, like for YouTube, and a fairly big one, not to brag. I was doing one of those overnight challenges, like the thing where you stay somewhere weird overnight, and this time I had picked Walmart. Why? I honestly don't know. Now I wish I hadn't. Maybe I thought the title, 24-Hour Walmart's Overnight Challenge, would attract a lot of viewers, but I don't care about that anymore. Okay, so it's Saturday night, and my two friends Cass and Anthony are helping me get situated in my hiding spot in the pet supplies section. It's about 9:50, so 10 minutes until closing time. I'm doing all this stupid stuff for the video, like giving a tour of my little hiding place, and just goofing around with my friends. Cass and Anthony leave right before closing time, and buy a bottle of Japanese mayonnaise, so they don't seem suspicious, leaving me to hide until 10:30 or so, when the employees begin to leave for the night, or when they should at least, according to the plan I drafted. This whole time I'm filming little comedy clips while hiding. things people will find funny, so they'll share my video and stuff. Always thinking about ways to expand my channel. So yeah, around 10:30 I get some text from Cass, who's keeping watch with Anthony outside until 11. Okay, the employees are starting to leave. You're good to go, bud. Wait, no. They got something out of a car, and they're starting to drag it inside. It's like really big. This is weird, dude. And she sent some pictures of a tall guy and a blonde girl, both in trademark blue Walmart vests, dragging a long, heavy-looking package towards the store's back door, by the loading dock. Of course, despite the bizarre, ominous sight in front of me, my curiosity gets the best of me, and I silently follow the employees throughout the dim, silent store. I make sure the camera is recording. At this point, I'm just kind of weirded out, and thinking that this video is going to get so many views, thanks to these strange employees. The title, Weird Walmart Employees After Dark, Gone Spooky, is bound to get millions of views. Maybe it will end up on every vlogger's dream. YouTube trending page. Anyway, that's not important right now. But what happened next is, and I'll never, ever forget it. The three of us finally find our way to the center of the store, where there are cardboard displays advertising cheap as seen on TV products. I hide behind a cutout of a smiling woman, holding a device that supposedly aerosols crystals to align your chakras or something, and watch as they begin to unwrap layers and layers of something plasticky around the package. The blonde woman mumbles something in a low voice into a walkie-talkie, and moments later, the lights are shut off completely, leaving the store absolutely dark. I hear the footsteps of many people, some more shuffling of plastic, and then the lights are turned on, but still dim. But the scene is so different now. A large circle of employees stands around the fully unwrapped package. Oh god. Package. I don't want to think about it. But now I have to tell someone. In the middle of the plastic tarp lies a body. I don't want to think about how it was, made to pass away. But it's mangled. Blood and viscera cover the tarp. I nearly throw up. Strangely, my first thought when I see it is, great. There's no way I can post this on YouTube now. And the employees? I couldn't tell you exactly what they are. But they're not really human anymore. Everything about them is just, wrong. Their bodies are long and gaunt, pale and withering, though some of them, I think, are quite young. Their fingers twitch about, and yellow fingernails, claws, that end in sharp points. Their eyes, they glow, and all of them, every single one of them, is wearing that horrible blue Walmart vest. I realize with a start that the corpse is too. I feel sick to my stomach, yet strangely drawn to them. I don't really know what they are though, just that I'm probably in a whole lot of danger right now. I want to run, scream, turn off my camera so it doesn't record what I know is about to happen, all at the same time, but I'm frozen in place, horrified yet allured. The tall man who now towers over everyone else by a good 2 or 3 feet snaps his gaunt fingers, commanding the group's attention. He nods, and the circle quickly becomes smaller as the employees pounce upon the corpse. They tear the already mangled body to pieces, consuming it with disgusting sucking and chewing noises that'd rival the very best ASMR YouTubers. Only when I see this horrible sight do I find in myself the common sense to book it out of there. I sprint as quietly as possible through the store back to the pet supplies area, and curl up in a ball with my camera, which I turn off. I'm in shock at what I've witnessed, and thoughts course through my head at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Should I call the police? What if I'm caught? Could Cass and Anthony help me escape? And of course, am I going to die here? I've been there for just a few minutes when the lights are completely turned on, and a male voice comes over the intercom.
Okay guys, get on it. Let's try to get home early. It's time for go-backs, and everyone please make sure the whole store is clean. Spick and span for tomorrow's shoppers, or face the consequences.
He adds menacingly. Then he follows it with,
I'm just kidding. But seriously guys, please clean everything up.
Everything? What could that be code for? Oh yeah, maybe the huge bloody mess you guys made in the middle of the store. Suddenly a group of employees is by my hiding place. They seem different from before. all normal size, laughing and joking among themselves. The blonde woman is there, reshelving misplaced cans of pet food. Of course, because this is Walmart, someone has nicely left several heavy bags of dog food in the aisle where I am hiding. And of course, it's this blonde lady's duty to put it back. She picks a bag up easily and leans down to put it on the bottom shelf where I am. I hold my breath, desperately hoping she won't find me, but she does. Her piercing blue eyes wordlessly command me to get out. I uncurl myself and push myself out until I stand between her and the group in the aisle. Basically, I'm trapped. You shouldn't be here. I nod vehemently. I'm sorry, I fell asleep while getting food for my dog. Really? With your video camera? She gets some kind of staticky message over her walkie-talkie and nods. Fine, we'll let you off this time. But now you owe us. This is technically trespassing, you know. A good-looking guy hands her a vest, seemingly from nowhere. We're short on seasonal hires, and you'd be perfect for the job. She hands me the vest. You start tomorrow. The sky was a murky gray. I had just finished my long and tiring day at work and was walking home. It was less than a mile. I would usually walk around the forest because it was supposedly safer, but today I was feeling miserable and not really up to the task for an extra walk. All I wanted to do was get back and relax. The time was nearing to 7:30 in the evening. I picked up my pace because I did not want to get lost in a pitch-black labyrinth of tall trees. The path started off very wide and flat, but as I went deeper and deeper in, it gradually narrowed until you could barely tell where it was. Covered with leaves and twigs, it got so bumpy that I was struggling to keep my balance. It happened when I was around halfway through my journey. Me, being unfit, was already exhausted, and my legs were aching. Every step was agony, and sent a rippling bolt up through the thigh, and all the way into my torso. Snap. A twig snapped about 15 meters behind me. This was followed by slow footsteps. They sounded exaggerated. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be digging their feet in as far as possible, and then moving them around to produce the most sound. I completely ignored what was going on behind me, because although people rarely take the path, they are allowed to be here. It was probably just a normal human being, possibly a deer or something, although they were never seen in the area. The sky was rapidly darkening by each step I took. After about half a minute, the noises stopped. I continued walking forward, trying to trace my eyes along the obscured path, so I would not lose it. Then there was a bang. A very, very loud bang. It sounded like the earth had just collided with the moon. After that, everything was silent, apart from the very soft and chilling wind that blew into my neck. I quickly jerked my head around to see what had just happened. The darkness combined with the shadows meant that I could not see much. I could definitely tell, though, that there was nothing there. Or at least in my path of vision. I kept on staring at the spot the noise was made. Still, no red flags had gone off in my head, but I was perplexed. I didn't know whether to ignore it, or go and investigate. I chose the latter option because someone or an animal could potentially be harmed. I slowly crept towards the giant oak tree, knowing that something was behind it. Now my heart rate began to increase. Each quiet step I took, the shadows grew deeper. I got more and more nervous. Nothing. I had peered behind. There was nothing there. What in the world had made the deafening noise? Then I saw him. He was peering at me about 20 meters away behind a bush. Something seemed off about him. Was it the extremely pale face? Was it the ridiculous costume? Was it his disheveled hair? Was it his bloodshot eyes, or his unnatural smile? Perhaps the shiny object in his pocket. It was all of those things. I was now petrified and shaking in fear, but I pretended I hadn't seen him, like any smart person would do. I pretended to scan the area and then pretend to miss him. I slowly turned around and tried to find the path again. Something colossal then dropped from the tree. I knew it was a trap. Being given an unbelievable amount of adrenaline, I broke out into a full-on sprint, not giving a damn where the path was. The thing, probably a cage, crashed behind me, and then the weird man screamed so loud and high it pierced my ears. It sounded like a hyena. He then began chasing after me. My intestines felt as if they had been tied in some sort of horrible knot, as I mindlessly leaped over logs and pushed past trees. I could hear him. He was still hot on my trail. After a few minutes of running through the forest, I was completely drained, and I almost fell into a blackberry bush. It pricked my arm, and I didn't think I could go for much longer. He did. He was still full of his mental energy. Then, through all the trees, I saw an orange light being emitted by a traffic light, and I heard the honking of a car horn. I started screaming as loud as possible to gather all the attention I needed. The psychopath behind me finally went silent as I continued racing toward the street. When I finally made it, I ran across the road, frustrating a lot of drivers. I barged open the doors to McDonald's and practically collapsed on top of the table. Everyone was staring at me. I didn't care though. Eventually I hitchhiked back home. It also turns out I didn't have to report him to the police either. As I was driving in my terrible yellow Volkswagen, I passed a wanted sign. It contained a black and white image of him. No name was provided, but at the bottom I really got the chills. It said wanted for murder. That experience truly shattered my brain. Sometimes I still see his crazed smile, or his horrific screams in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I wonder if it's real. I now know one thing. I will never, ever go through that forest, or any forest again. It was a hot night in July, and I was driving through the country with my windows down. My girlfriend Lisa was sat next to me screaming the words to whatever song was on the radio. I was taking her back to her house after she spent the weekend at my new place. We were both in high spirits, because just before leaving I asked Lisa if she'd like to move in, and she said yes. For some background, Lisa and I had been dating the last 2 years, since we were both 17. She lived right up the street from me our whole childhood, but we never properly met until sophomore year of high school, during a chance encounter on the bus. Our bus route was short enough that most of us that wanted to could sit on our own, and sulk as teenagers do. But one day our bus broke down, and we had to take a short bus. Everyone had to squeeze in together, and we just happened to find ourselves in the same bus seat. I had on my I Defeated a Demogorgon shirt. She commented on it. And well, to take a long story short, we were dating a year later. It was on this trip back to her place that we passed my old house, and then the farm that was next to it. I didn't think anything of it until we passed the farmhouse. Standing in front of the farmhouse was a tall man, with a hat and a cigarette in his mouth. He was quite tall, but he was otherwise completely normal looking from what I could tell in the dark. Despite this, seeing him caused my heartbeat to grow in my ears, and sweat to build up on my brow ridge. Due to the anxiety, I had unconsciously sped up the car. Lisa noticed. "Sweetheart, slow down. You're going to miss my house," she said, and she was right. I did. "Sorry," I said, pulling into a random driveway to turn around, daydreaming. "About what?" said Lisa, clearly expecting a certain answer. "Scarlett Johansson," I said, and quickly received a smack on the arm. "Jerk," she said, trying to sound sincere, but she couldn't hold in a short giggle. Soon we were at her house, and I was walking her in. We sat in her bed, cuddled up, talking about how excited we were for the next step in our relationship. It was one of those moments you wish you could just take the feeling you have and carry it around with you wherever you go. But I couldn't, and before long I had to leave. I took the long way back so I wouldn't have to pass the farm again. I got back to my apartment, took my shoes and pants off, and watched some show on Netflix. I thought about Lisa, and how next time I saw her, it would be to help bring her stuff up here to stay. After a long time, I fell asleep. 3 months passed. Lisa had found a job close by, all her boxes had been unpacked, and on this particular night we were going out to dinner, at a local steakhouse to celebrate 3 months of her being moved in. We got there late in the afternoon, and found the place was unusually busy. I knew we should have waited until tomorrow. Everyone's celebrating 3 months of moving in tonight, she said. Yeah, they should really open up reservations for events like this, I responded. We both laughed, and were soon being shown to our seats. Our order was taken quickly, but because of the unexpected rush we were told the wait would be longer than usual. After a while, I was starting to feel a little cramped in my seat, and a little claustrophobic with all the people around. So I told Lisa I was going to go out for some fresh air. When I got outside, I was surprised to find it very quiet, and virtually devoid of people. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes for a minute, feeling a cool wind slide across my face. I opened my eyes, looked towards the door, and I saw him. The man in front of the farmhouse. He was unmistakable. He was tall. He had the same hat, and there was a cigarette in his hand, which was dangling by his side. Only now I could see more. He had a red flannel shirt and overalls, as well as worker boots on his feet. If the situation were a bit different, I might have laughed. He looked like what a farmer in a cartoon would look like, but instead of laughing, I was panicking, simultaneously terrified that he was so close to me, and feeling ridiculous of being so scared of a fairly ordinary man. I nearly ran back inside to Lisa sitting where I last saw her. "There you are, the food just came out." She looked up to see me panting and sweating. "Is everything okay, David?" she said. "Did you go for a jog?" Trying to insert some humor into the awkward situation. "Yeah," I said. "Just fine. The food looks delicious." And I sat down but ate very little. It was obvious to Lisa that something was wrong, and she didn't say anything until later that night when we were in bed. "So are you going to tell me what happened while you were outside at dinner?" she asked in a sweet voice that was nevertheless demanding an answer. I tried to speak, but thinking of him made my mouth go dry. Eventually I answered. "I saw a man," I said softly. "I had seen him before when I was driving you back to your house, and..." I rested my head in my hands and took a long pause. I don't know, it just freaked me out. I know it sounds dumb. Lisa was rubbing my back now. "It's not dumb, darling," she said, and she pulled my head to her chest. I closed my eyes and went to sleep. After this, I started to become more jumpy, and I found myself constantly on alert. Lisa asked me about this, but I told her it was just the stress of work getting to me. Speaking of work, my boss had noticed that I had a considerable loss in production. I told him I wasn't feeling well lately. He recommended I see a doctor. A few more months passed, and the longer I went without seeing him, the more agitated and jumpy I got. Lisa kept asking me what it was all about, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. That being said, I was mostly able to keep my life under control during this time. One day, Lisa and I were shopping at a strip mall on a Saturday afternoon to get her some books for a geek club she had just joined. While she was in the bookstore, I decided to surprise her with something cute from a little boutique a little farther down the sidewalk. I started walking that way when I noticed a big group of what looked to be high schoolers coming my way. I moved out of their way, and when they passed and I continued on walking, I saw him, but this time his back wasn't to me, and he wasn't obscured by shadow. His face was entirely unremarkable, but something was terribly wrong. I recognized it. I didn't know from where, but I knew I had seen it, and for some reason that filled me with more dread than I've ever felt. His lips parted in an awkward smile, like he was trying to look kind, but didn't know the right way to do it. I tried to back away, but I tripped on something, fell back, and my torso slammed against the pavement, followed by my head. Despite the awful ringing in my ears, I tried to get up to my feet to run away, but I only wobbled helplessly and hit the ground again. This was the end. I knew it. I was at his mercy now. I couldn't escape. I could never escape. Next thing I knew, I was surrounded by a small group of 4 or 5 teens. I quickly realized they were the ones I just passed. One was putting a phone to her ear, and a shorter girl next to her said, "Hang on, he's waking up." I sat up, which caused a stab of pain in my head. I looked at the boy closest to me. "Did you see him?" I muttered. "See what? Who?" said the boy. "The farmer." I said a bit more clearly. "The farmer." "I didn't see anyone, man," he said, taking a step back from me. Suddenly I realized my phone was ringing. It was Lisa. I swiped to accept and put it to my ear. "Hey, sorry,
Hey, where are you? This is the 3rd time I've called,"
she said, clearly agitated. "I'm sorry, I took a little fall on the way to the boutique." I half spoke, half groaned.
"Oh, honey, are you okay?"
She said, her voice shifting to concern. "I'm fine," I said shortly. "Do you have the book?"
I do.
She replied. "Then let's go." After this, everything changed. I couldn't hold any kind of conversation with Lisa. I tried and tried, but his face just kept coming into my head. She said I should see a therapist, or a shrink, but I knew that if I told them what I saw, they'd just have me locked up. How was I supposed to explain to them that I'm being trailed by a farmer, without sounding crazy? Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I still am. Work suffered. I tried to do the bare minimum amount, so they couldn't really justify firing me, but pretty soon I wasn't even doing that. Sex wasn't any respite either. We did it every so often, but I didn't get any enjoyment from it, and she could tell. I desperately wanted to make it all work, but it wasn't going to. A lot of times you'll hear about a lot of big fights signifying the end of a relationship, but we didn't have the energy for that. I wanted to reach out to her, but before long she was pulling back, and I don't blame her. I don't think we ever really talked about the problem. I hated talking about it. I hated sounding like an insane person. She knew I hated talking about it, so she never confronted me about it. Needless to say, we could have done it all better. Soon enough she moved out, and I was fired from my job, and I moved back in with my parents. I hated it there. Not because I hated my parents or anything, but because I felt like it was proof that I couldn't make it out there on my own. I hated it double because I had to be right next to that farm. I spent most of my time in my room, watching TV, playing video games, anything that kept me distracted, so I could make sure I never looked out to that farm. I was scared, and angry, and anxious, but I think mostly I was ashamed. Ashamed of my fear of the man, and the farm. Ashamed of how I allowed our relationship to fail. Ashamed at how I'd failed in general. Soon enough this shame had reached a fever pitch, and I had decided that night I would go into the farm, to prove to myself that nothing was there, to move on. A part of me just knew that if I went in there and saw him, confronted him, as he'd confronted me, I could be rid of him. At midnight I got out of bed, slipped on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, and crept out of my room. I walked down into the kitchen, which had a door connecting to the outside, a straight line to the fields. I went up to it, putting a sweaty hand on the doorknob. I took a deep breath and twisted. Soon I was sprinting to the fields, thinking if I gained enough speed, the fear would be unable to turn me back. I plunged into the thick crops. I felt them scratch at my arms and face as I fought my way through them. After what must have been 10 minutes, I came to a clearing in the field. I collapsed in it. I was taking quick, heavy breaths, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I was hot and heavy, but it felt good in the cool April night air. I looked around for my tormentor. I was sure that if I came to this field, he would be here. He'd be here so I could confront him, tell him I wasn't afraid of him, and when he knew that, he'd most likely drop dead, because he'd lost all his power. "I'm here," I screamed into the field. "Come out." But only cicadas and crickets responded. "Come out," I kept screaming. "Come out!" Suddenly I felt infinitely small in this field. I laid on the ground and curled into a ball. It's funny how when we feel small, our natural reaction is to make ourselves even smaller. But that's what I did. I felt so small and vulnerable, and powerless in that field. Its very presence made my chest feel like it was constricting. It was oppressive. "Come out," I said weakly. "Please." At that moment in my head, I admitted it to myself. I was scared. I was so scared. And for the first time, I felt the right to be. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, and I tried not to let them come. I tried to hold on to the last shred of dignity this field hadn't taken from me, but it didn't last long. Soon I was sobbing again in the field, curled up in a fetal position, letting the tears flow freely. I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't look up. Even if I did, my vision would be too blurry to see. But I didn't need to see. I could sense his presence. I could feel his awkward smile. I did nothing. I just laid there and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. As quickly as they came, the footsteps went in the other direction. I woke up early the next morning in the field. I made my way back through the crop to the house. None of my family was up, so I crawled back into bed. This was several years ago. I have a career now, a house, and a girl that I've settled down with. You probably think that night was the last I ever heard of the farmer, but no. I still see him from time to time. He still inspires great fear in me, but I'm living with it. I used to think that if I confronted my fear once, it would go away. But there are some things you have to keep confronting. Some things you have to keep beating if you want to live life. I've come to terms with the fact that I'll always have to confront this fear. I've come to terms with the fact that as long as I live, wherever I go, the farmer follows.